Arrogant millionaire despises and humiliates his son's nanny, thinking she's just another employee. But when he gets home early, he witnesses something that leaves him devastated. Eduardo was a man known by everyone as one of the most successful businessmen in the city. His fortune was impressive, built with sweat and ambition, but also with a calculated coldness that set him apart from most people. Eduardo was a practical man, focused on numbers, actions, and goals. He lived in a luxurious mansion, with everything money could buy, luxury cars, rare works of art, and the best furniture imaginable. His house, imposing and full of refinement, was as cold as Eduardo himself. Despite all the comfort that surrounded him, something always seemed to be missing. And this absence grew even more when his wife, the only person who could perhaps soften his heart, passed away unexpectedly. She left a huge void, not only in Eduardo's life, but especially in Gabriel's, the young son they had together. Her death shook the boy deeply, but Eduardo, unable to deal with his emotions, only locked himself even more in his business world. Since then, Eduardo has adopted a practical solution to what he saw as yet another problem in his life. Gabriel, who was still very young, needed care, attention, and love, things that Eduardo didn't know how to give or didn't want to give. So he started hiring nannies to fill this role. The nannies came and went like any other employees. Eduardo didn't care who they were, only that they would be there to take care of the boy, so that he could continue with his routine. The truth is that Eduardo barely knew his own son. He saw Gabriel as a responsibility, something to be taken care of in the same way as his mansion or his business. And while the boy was growing up, Eduardo kept his emotional distance. Deep down, he believed that as long as Gabriel had everything he needed, from expensive toys to the best schools, that would be enough. After all, that was how he himself had been raised. But as much as Eduardo tried to ignore it, there was one undeniable reality: money is no substitute for affection. And as he continued to immerse himself in his routine of travel and meetings, Gabriel became increasingly isolated. For Eduardo, his son was not a priority, he was just another task to be delegated. He controlled every aspect of the house and the boy's life with the same impersonality he used in business, without realizing that he was, little by little, distancing himself from what really mattered. And so Eduardo's life went on, full of important meetings, business dinners, and new acquisitions. Everything seemed in order from the outside, but inside that grand mansion, there was a constant silence, an emptiness that neither luxury nor coldness could fill. Gabriel, the little boy who had already lost his mother, now lived under the distant gaze of his father, surrounded by nannies who barely stayed long enough to really get to know him. One day, Anna arrived at Eduardo's huge mansion, with a small suitcase in her hand and her heart full of hope. She was a simple but very dedicated young woman who worked hard to support her own family. Despite her humble appearance, Anna carried within her an invisible strength, a strength that came from love for others and the desire to make a difference, especially in the lives of the children she cared for. Gabriel, even without knowing it, was about to meet someone who would completely change his life. From the very first time she met Eduardo, Anna realized the kind of man he was. He looked her up and down with disdain, as if he could measure her worth by the clothes she wore or the way she spoke. Anna's simple clothes, her modestly tied hair, everything about her appearance seemed to irritate Eduardo. He didn't bother to be polite. On the contrary, he treated her with a coldness and rudeness that would make anyone want to give up right away. But Anna was different. Eduardo, accustomed to making people feel small, believed that Anna was nothing more than an insignificant employee. In his mind, someone so simple could not add anything of value to his life or Gabriel's. And he made that clear from the beginning. He spoke to her in an impersonal and cutting manner, as if she were just another piece in his enormous control puzzle. He gave short orders, always without looking directly into her eyes, making it clear that for him, Anna was nothing more than another temporary replacement, who would probably last as little as the others. Anna, however, did not let herself get down. She knew she needed that job, but more than that, she felt a special responsibility for Gabriel. From the very first moment, she noticed that the boy did not smile much and that there was a deep sadness in his eyes, a loneliness that she immediately recognized. Gabriel was emotionally neglected, and Anna saw in this an opportunity to do what she did best: care, give affection, and bring lightness to the lives of those who needed it most. With each cold comment from Eduardo, Anna took a deep breath and remembered the reason she was there: Gabriel. He was her priority. Eduardo could treat her however he wanted, but he couldn't take her away from the purpose she had within herself. Anna had worked for other families, dealt with challenges, and knew it wouldn't be easy. But nothing, not even Eduardo's arrogance, would make her give up trying to give the boy what he needed most: attention, love, and patience. While Eduardo maintained the posture of an unshakable man, Ana, without knowing it, was about to shake all the certainties he had about life. Even under Eduardo's critical and watchful eye, Ana quickly began to win Gabriel's heart. Unlike the previous nannies, who only did what was necessary, Ana went above and beyond. She truly cared about the boy. In the early days, Gabriel seemed suspicious, quiet, and withdrawn into his own world. He was not a child who asked for attention or complained. He had simply learned to live without the affection he lacked. Eduardo was always absent, and the previous nannies treated him as part of the job, without any emotional connection. Ana, however, quickly realized the barrier that surrounded him. Instead of imposing her presence, she approached him gently and patiently. In the early days, she sat next to Gabriel while he played alone, without demanding that he interact. She observed him silently, learning his routines, his small gestures. Little by little, the boy began to relax, feeling at ease with her calm and caring presence. She began to include simple activities that brought joy to Gabriel's day. They did puzzles, read stories together, and sometimes they just sat in the garden to watch the clouds and talk about what they saw in them. Ana knew that true love cannot be forced. It is built in small moments, in silent exchanges and spontaneous smiles. And that is what began to happen. Gabriel, accustomed to living in emotional silence, began to open his heart to Ana. The first time she saw him smile for real was while they were telling a story about animals in the forest. It was a shy laugh at first, but little by little it turned into laughter. For Ana, that sound was a silent victory. Gabriel was beginning to feel safe with her. Over time, Gabriel began to trust Ana in a way he had never trusted anyone. He became attached to his nanny like never before. He would run to her when he woke up, asking her to read more stories, to play with him, or simply to stay by his side. The bond between them was evident. Ana was not just a caregiver, she had become the mother figure that Gabriel needed so much. His mother's absence still affected him deeply, but Ana brought him something that eased the pain: attention, love, and patience. Gabriel's behavior began to change. The sadness in his eyes began to dissipate, giving way to a sparkle that had not been there before. He began to talk more, laugh more, and play like a child his age should. Ana, without making any apparent effort, was filling the void that Eduardo had never noticed. The boy was transforming before Ana's eyes. Every moment by his side was another layer of affection being built, an emotional fortress that protected him from his father's neglect. Eduardo, however, remained distant, immersed in his business and oblivious to the silent change that was occurring in his own home. Even though he saw the positive changes in Gabriel, Eduardo remained blind to the transformation that Ana was bringing to his son's life. For him, Gabriel's well-being was the result of what money could provide: expensive toys, a comfortable mansion, and good schools. He could not understand that the real reason for the boy's smile was Ana's constant and loving presence, which went far beyond the responsibilities of a common nanny. And instead of recognizing her effort, Eduardo continued to treat her with contempt. At every opportunity, he found a reason to criticize her. If Gabriel left a toy out of place, it was Ana's fault. If the boy's meal was not the way he liked it, Eduardo would point the finger at her. Any mistake, no matter how small, became an excuse for Eduardo to vent his coldness. He treated her as if her only value was following orders, never recognizing the emotional impact that Ana was having on Gabriel's life. "You're doing nothing more than your duty," he said in a cold, almost indifferent tone. And as if that weren't enough, one day he called Ana into his office and announced bluntly that he was going to reduce her salary. "I don't see anything extraordinary in what you do. And for what I'm paying you, you should." The sentence was a hard blow, but Ana remained silent, looking at the floor as he spoke with his usual arrogance. Eduardo believed that people only acted for money, that they only cared about what they could earn. He didn't understand that, for Ana, that job was much more than a financial issue. Of course, she needed the money to support her family, but the real reason she stayed there was Gabriel. She saw the boy blossoming little by little, recovering the joy that had been taken away from him so early, and that was what motivated her to endure Eduardo's humiliations. Every time he treated her badly, she remembered Gabriel's smile, and that gave her the strength to carry on. Ana knew that Gabriel needed her, and that was enough. She bore the criticism and contempt with dignity, because she was there for him. And deep down, she also knew that Eduardo didn't see what he was missing. He didn't understand that what Gabriel needed was not more expensive toys or an immaculate mansion. What he needed most was the love she was offering. Eduardo's words, no matter how harsh they were, never shook Anna's essence. She didn't respond to the humiliations, nor did she retaliate against the unfair criticism. Instead, she focused even more on Gabriel. She continued to care for him with all the affection in the world, knowing that, even if Eduardo didn't recognize it, every gesture of love she offered the boy made a difference. For Anna, what mattered was not Eduardo's opinion, but Gabriel's well-being, who seemed more confident and happy with her every day. Eduardo, on the other hand, remained distant, thinking that his power and money were enough to keep things under control. He never stopped to observe what was really going on between Anna and Gabriel. In his eyes, she was still just an employee. But in Gabriel's eyes, Anna was much more than that. She was the person who, with love and patience, filled the void left by the absence of her father and mother. Anna endured the humiliations without ever losing focus. After all, she knew that the love she was offering Gabriel was stronger than any cruel words from Eduardo. One ordinary day, Eduardo made an unexpected decision. He was tired, overwhelmed by endless meetings and the pressure of business, and decided to go home early. This was rare. He almost never broke his rigid routine, but that afternoon, something was bothering him, a restlessness he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the fact that, despite all his wealth, he still felt that something was out of place. He wondered how Gabriel was, but quickly dismissed the thought. After all, he had always believed that, as long as the boy had material comfort, he would be fine. When he arrived at the mansion, he expected to find Gabriel playing with his expensive toys or, as usual, watching television. But when he entered, he found an unusual silence. The huge rooms echoed with the sound of his footsteps, and the house seemed emptier than ever. He called for his son, but there was no answer. Impatient, he began to search the rooms. There was no sign of Gabriel or Anna. It was then that Eduardo heard a muffled laugh coming from the garden. Curious, he approached with light steps, as if he were afraid of interrupting whatever was happening. When he reached the porch, from where he could see the extensive, well-kept garden, he stopped. The scene before his eyes took him completely by surprise. There was Anna, sitting on the grass, with Gabriel lying on her lap. Around her, simple toys and an open book. Anna was reading a story in a soft, almost sing-song voice, as if each word were a note that touched Gabriel's heart. And the boy, whom Eduardo had always seen as withdrawn and silent, was laughing. Not a forced or shy laugh, but a full, happy laugh, completely involved in the story Anna was telling. It was a Gabriel that Eduardo had never met. Eduardo stood paralyzed, watching the scene. The sound of his son's laughter, something he hadn't heard in so long, moved him in an unexpected way. He realized that Gabriel was happy, a genuine happiness that didn't come from the expensive toys or designer clothes he bought, but from something much simpler, Anna's attention and affection. He saw for the first time what it meant to have a true connection with another person. Anna, whom he had always despised and humiliated, was offering Gabriel something he had never been able to give: love, presence, and patience. She wasn't there just to fulfill her role, but to fill the emotional void that Eduardo's absence and the loss of his mother had left in the boy. Eduardo felt disconcerted. For years, he had believed that Gabriel was being well taken care of, that all his son needed was material comfort. But seeing the scene before him, he began to realize how wrong he was. Anna, that woman he had so often judged as insignificant, was giving Gabriel something that all the money in the world couldn't buy. He had never sat down to read a story to his son, had never laughed with him like that. Something began to change inside Eduardo. The sight of Anna and Gabriel together, so connected, so full of life and love, was like a mirror, reflecting everything he had neglected. For the first time, he saw clearly how far he had come from his own son. He realized that Gabriel didn't need more things, but rather someone who truly loved him, who was there for him. And in that moment, Eduardo understood that, despite all his success in business, he had failed at something much more important. Stunned by the revelation, Eduardo took a step back, without Anna or Gabriel noticing his presence. His heart was heavy, torn between guilt and regret. He realized that, all this time, while he had been concerned with accumulating wealth, he had missed what really mattered. As Eduardo stood there, standing in the garden, an emotion he had not known for a long time began to rise in his chest. He, who had always believed that love and care were signs of weakness, felt a deep pang in his heart. It was as if a barrier he had built over the years was crumbling before that simple yet powerful scene. He, the man who controlled everything around him with an iron fist, now felt completely helpless when he saw his son laughing in the arms of another person. Gabriel didn't look at him the way he looked at Anna. In the boy's eyes, there was admiration, trust, and something Eduardo had never achieved, a pure, unconditional love. Every time the boy laughed with Anna, Eduardo realized that he had never seen that sparkle in his son's eyes when they were together. For Gabriel, his father was a distant figure, a material provider, but not an emotional one. Eduardo was not the person who brought comfort or happiness to the boy. In fact, he realized that Gabriel, even though they lived in the same house, probably felt his absence more than his presence. Suddenly, all the pride that Eduardo had carried throughout his life like a shield began to crumble. He had always considered himself a powerful man, someone who controlled his destiny and the destiny of others. In business, no one dared to challenge him, and he used his wealth as proof of success and superiority. But there in the garden, seeing Anna and Gabriel so connected, Eduardo felt small, almost insignificant. What had he really achieved? The truth hit him hard. All the money in the world, all his possessions and the status he so valued, could not buy what Anna was offering Gabriel for free, love. And Eduardo, with all his fortune, had never known how to give that to his own son. He felt weak, vulnerable, as if something inside him was breaking. Gabriel's smile, which should have warmed his heart, now filled him with a pain that he did not know how to process. For years, Eduardo believed he was doing the right thing. He thought that by providing everything Gabriel needed financially, he was fulfilling his role as a father. He was proud of giving his son a comfortable life, of making sure he lacked nothing materially. But now, seeing Gabriel's true joy in Anna's arms, he understood that he had failed at something much bigger. He had failed at being the father Gabriel needed. The millionaire, who had always seen himself as a giant, felt himself shrink before that simple display of affection between Anna and Gabriel. It was as if the boy was showing him, without words, what had always been missing in their relationship. Eduardo realized that while he was chasing more money, power, and success, Gabriel was chasing something much simpler, the presence of someone who truly cared about him. And for the first time in a long time, Eduardo didn't feel in control. His heart, hardened by years of coldness and arrogance, now beat with a different pain. He realized what he had really lost during all this time. It wasn't the respect of his colleagues, nor the recognition for his success in business. He had lost the love of his own son, something he hadn't even known he was losing until that moment. Eduardo, the man who had always prided himself on never showing weakness, felt tears burning in his eyes. He turned slowly, not wanting Anna or Gabriel to see him in that vulnerable state. Each step he took back to the mansion was heavy, filled with regret and pain. Inside him, a silent battle was taking place. Eduardo knew he needed to change, but he didn't know where to start. At that moment, the arrogant millionaire felt something he had never felt before, the desire to be more than a distant provider. He wanted, for the first time, to be a real father. Eduardo entered the mansion with heavy steps, feeling more alone than he had ever felt before. The walls of the house, which had once symbolized his success, now seemed to press in on him, as if they were silent witnesses to his loneliness and failure. The silence that had once given him a sense of power was now suffocating him. He threw himself into the armchair in his office, but he could not relax. The scenes from the garden still echoed in his mind, over and over again. Every laugh from Gabriel, every sweet word from Anna, every gesture of affection that he had never given his son. For the first time in a long time, Eduardo faced an internal battle. For years, he had built an armor of arrogance and coldness, convinced that this was the only way to protect himself and succeed. In business, this approach had earned him power, respect, or at least fear, and a fortune that few could imagine. But now he began to realize that this armor was isolating him from something much more important: people, love, true connection. He remembered his past. He remembered how, when he was young, he had dreamed of having a family different from the one he had. His father, as absent and strict as he was, had never offered him the kind of affection he saw between Anna and Gabriel. Eduardo had promised himself that it would be different, but as time passed and he became more and more involved in his relentless pursuit of success, he ended up repeating the same mistakes he had sworn never to make. He had become exactly what he despised so much: an absent father. The truth, as painful as it was undeniable, began to surface. He didn't know how to connect with Gabriel. He didn't know how to be the father his son needed. For years, he had hidden behind his fortune, believing that providing materially was enough. But now he saw clearly that while he accumulated wealth, he was losing the most precious thing: Gabriel's love and respect. The boy was clinging to Anna because she offered him what he never knew how to give. Eduardo took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of guilt and anger at himself. The idea that a simple gesture of affection, something he had always considered unnecessary or frivolous, could have prevented all of this shook him deeply. How could he, such a successful man, fail at something so fundamental? His mind also turned to Anna. He had humiliated her countless times, without ever recognizing the value she brought to Gabriel's life. How could he have been so blind? Anna, with her patience and kindness, had won his son's heart in a way he never could. Eduardo had always underestimated her, judging her by her humble appearance and simple clothes, without ever understanding her true value. He realized how unfair he had been to her, and how this had only widened the distance between him and Gabriel. Sitting in his office, Eduardo felt stripped of all the arrogance he had always carried. He was no longer the ruthless businessman, the arrogant millionaire who always had control of everything. For the first time, he was faced with a challenge that money could not solve, and this frightened him deeply. He didn't know how to fix his relationship with Gabriel. Everything seemed distant, as if it were already too late. But deep down, a spark of hope still existed. Eduardo knew he needed to change, that there was an opportunity for him to become someone better, not just for his son, but for himself. He needed to learn to be vulnerable, to let go of the control he always thought he needed. More than anything, he needed to win back Gabriel's love, not with expensive gifts or grand gestures, but with something he had never offered: time, affection, and presence. However, the question that continued to torment him was, would he be able to do it? That night, after hours of reflection, Eduardo made a decision he never imagined he would be able to make. He needed to apologize. Not with empty words or superficial apologies, but with sincerity. It was a gesture that his years of arrogance would never allow, but he knew it was the first step to fixing everything that had gone wrong. With a heavy sigh, he called Anna to his office. Anna entered the office hesitantly, as she always did when Eduardo summoned her. In her mind, she was already expecting the worst: another unfair criticism, maybe even a reduction in her salary. After all, Eduardo had never spared harsh comments about her work, no matter how dedicated he was. Her eyes captured the image of the millionaire sitting in his leather armchair, but this time, he looked different. His posture, usually rigid and domineering, was relaxed, almost dejected. There was something in Eduardo's gaze that she had never seen before: vulnerability. Anna stood, waiting for what would come next, her nerves on edge. But to her complete surprise, Eduardo lowered his head for a moment before speaking. "Anna," he began, his voice sounding lower and more hesitant than usual. I've made a lot of mistakes." Anna blinked, confused, not knowing how to react to those words. What did he mean by that? It didn't seem like the beginning of a scolding, but she remained alert, not letting her guard down. Eduardo looked up, and she saw something different in him, something that was unusual in the cold and calculating man she knew. "I was unfair to you. And it wasn't just once," he continued, his voice full of regret. "From the moment you walked into this house, I treated you as if you were insignificant. I never gave you the respect you deserved, and, today for the first time, I saw how wrong I was." Anna didn't know what to say. Eduardo, that arrogant and superior man, was he apologizing? She remained silent, feeling the tension in the air, but also something else: the sincerity in his words. "Today I saw how much you mean to Gabriel," Eduardo said, his voice cracking slightly, something completely new to him. "I realized that while I was too busy with my business, you were here, being the person he really needed. And I never recognized that." Anna, always strong and resilient, felt a slight pang of emotion in her chest. The humiliations, the insults, the criticisms, all of it was clear in her memory, but what she saw before her now was a broken man, trying to rebuild something he didn't even know was lost. She stood her ground, even though the heat of emotion was growing inside her. Eduardo continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I can't change what I did. I know I treated you badly, but I want to tell you that I'm sorry. And I thank you for everything you've done for Gabriel. You've been the person I could never be." Anna remained silent for a few seconds, absorbing those words. The pain of all the humiliation she had endured was still there, but so was the gratitude for hearing Eduardo finally recognize the value of what she did, not just as an employee, but as someone who cared deeply for Gabriel. "I accept your apology," Anna replied, with gentle but firm calm. "And I accept it not for myself, but for Gabriel. He needs you, more than ever. Anna's words, full of wisdom and empathy, hit Eduardo like a harsh truth. She was not just forgiving him out of her own feelings, but because she understood that the most important thing at that moment was Gabriel's well-being. She knew that the boy needed his father as much as he needed her. And in that moment, Eduardo understood that in order to fix things, he would have to start being the father he had never been. He nodded, still with the weight of guilt in his heart, but also with a new purpose emerging in his mind. From that moment on, apologies would not be enough. He would have to act. After that night of sincere apologies, something inside Eduardo began to change. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to reflect on what really mattered. The man who had previously lived only to accumulate wealth and power now saw the world through different eyes, and this led him to make a decision. He needed to change, both as a father and as a human being. The next day, Eduardo woke up early, something he rarely did. Instead of locking himself in his office or going straight to work, he decided to do something different. He went to Gabriel's room, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. The boy, who was used to seeing his father as an almost ghostly presence in his life, looked surprised when Eduardo entered with a shy smile. "Good morning, Gabriel," Eduardo said hesitantly, trying to hide his nervousness. He didn't really know how to start, but the simple gesture of being there was already a step forward. Gabriel, still suspicious, replied quietly, "Good morning, Daddy." Eduardo was a little embarrassed, but approached his son's bed. "What do you think about us spending some time together today?" he asked, hoping Gabriel would accept. The boy, surprised, looked at his father with big eyes. That was an offer he never expected to hear. "Do you want to play with me, Daddy?" Gabriel asked, incredulous. "Yes, I do," Eduardo replied, with a smile he didn't even know he had. At that moment, something new happened. The two spent the morning together, playing in the garden, something simple, but which represented a big step for both of them. At first, Eduardo felt out of place, not knowing how to connect with Gabriel's childish world. But as the hours passed, he began to relax, laughing at his son's jokes, having fun with games he had never considered important before. And to his surprise, he realized that he was enjoying it. The days passed, and Eduardo, committed to his change, continued to make efforts to be present in Gabriel's life. It wasn't an instantaneous transformation, but little by little, the distance between father and son began to diminish. Each gesture of affection, each shared moment, was like a bridge that he built, step by step, to win back the boy's love. But Eduardo's transformation didn't stop with Gabriel. He also began to see Anna in a completely new way. The man who had previously seen her as just another employee now treated her with respect and recognition. He knew that without her, Gabriel would have spent a lonely and deprived childhood. Now he saw Anna not only as his son's nanny, but as an essential figure for the boy's happiness and development. One day, after a particularly pleasant day, Eduardo called Anna to talk again. This time, not to apologize, but to thank her. "Anna," he said, looking into her eyes, "I know I never treated you the way you deserved. But I want you to know that I am deeply grateful for everything you did for Gabriel. You brought joy to his life and to mine too." Anna, ever humble, simply smiled and replied, "I always knew that Gabriel needed love, and I did what I could. But now he has the father he always wanted, and that's what really matters." As time went by, the mansion, which had once been cold and silent, began to be filled with sounds that Eduardo didn't know he was missing. Laughter, conversations, and moments of affection between him and Gabriel. Where there had been loneliness before, there was now love and presence. The house became a true home, something Eduardo had never experienced, not even when his wife was alive. The employees, who had previously feared Eduardo's coldness and impersonality, began to notice the change in their boss. He was no longer the arrogant man who only cared about money. He began to greet people, ask how they were doing, and most importantly, show genuine interest in the well-being of Gabriel and those around him. The transformation was not easy for Eduardo. There were times when he had relapses, times when the old behavior tried to resurface, especially on the most stressful days. But he was determined to continue on the path he had chosen. Every time he saw Gabriel smile, or heard a joyful laugh echoing through the house, he knew it was worth it. Gabriel's love, which had once seemed unattainable, was now within his reach. And Eduardo, the man who once believed that power and money were the only things that mattered, finally understood that the greatest treasure he could conquer was the love of his own son. Time passed, and Eduardo's transformation became a tangible reality in the mansion. The man who was once known for his arrogance and coldness now walked through the halls with a calm countenance and a smile on his face. He learned to appreciate the little things: a simple breakfast with Gabriel, a walk in the park, or even a quiet afternoon reading books together. Every moment with his son was a treasure he had neglected for so long. The relationship between father and son grew stronger every day. Eduardo began to understand Gabriel's needs, not only physical but also emotional. He became a present father, listening attentively to the boy's dreams and fears. Gabriel's laughter, which had previously sounded distant, now filled the house, and Eduardo felt proud to be the reason for so much happiness. Anna, in turn, also felt the changes. The new Eduardo no longer saw her as a simple employee, but as part of his family. He knew that without the dedication and love she offered Gabriel, the change in his life would not have been possible. One day, while they were talking in the kitchen, Eduardo called her in for a more serious conversation. "Anna," he began, "I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done. You didn't just take care of my son, you helped him find the joy that I couldn't provide. I would like to raise your salary and make sure you have everything you need to take care of your family." Anna was speechless. This proposal was unexpected and made her feel valued like never before. "Eduardo, I did nothing more than my duty. The important thing is that Gabriel is happy. That is my greatest reward," she replied, trying to contain herself. "No, you did much more than that. You changed his life and mine. I realize that simplicity and affection are more valuable than any amount of money I could have," Eduardo said, with sincerity in every word. He then promised to provide Anna with benefits, ensuring that she would have access to a good education for her children and medical care, something she could never have imagined. Eduardo was determined to show her that his value went far beyond a salary. He wanted to repay all the love and dedication she had given him, and this was reflected in his generous attitude. Anna accepted the proposal humbly, but what really touched her was the change in Eduardo's behavior. The way he now treated the people around him, with respect and gratitude, was a reflection of the man he had become. She never imagined that this cold and distant man could be capable of such a transformation. As time passed, the mansion became a vibrant home, full of love and laughter. The walls, once filled with loneliness, now bore witness to moments of affection and joy. Eduardo and Gabriel cultivated traditions, such as family game nights or outdoor walks, where they could have fun and learn together. The mansion's employees, who had previously lived in fear, began to feel the change in the atmosphere. Eduardo now greeted them with a smile, asking about their families and listening to their stories. He understood that each of them had an important role in building this new reality. Eduardo learned to value human relationships. He discovered that the love he received in return for the attention he gave Gabriel and Anna was infinitely more rewarding than any financial transaction. He realized that what really mattered in life was not material possessions, but the bonds we form and the way we treat each other. This new phase brought Eduardo a deep sense of peace and purpose. He was determined to be a better man, not only for Gabriel, but for everyone around him. And as he looked to the future, Eduardo felt hopeful, aware that there was still much to learn, but now with an open heart and a new perspective. The transformation that began with a simple apology became a journey of rediscovery and growth. And so, Eduardo not only redeemed himself, but also found true happiness in the simplicity, gratitude, and love that surrounded him.